Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be here in Tokyo, especially when it is in such a short time distance. Dear colleagues, dear friends from Japan, it's an honor and a pleasure to be invited to exchange and think with you on how the COPs can contribute to create a sustainable communities. Cooperatives, you all know this sentence, are enterprise that built a better world. That was the International Cooperative Year motto, and this is now the ICA motto. Of course, the question is, what is a better world, and for whom is this better world to be built? This better world is a place where women and men are deeply rooted in a community. That is to say that they are not only thinking of themselves as individuals, but they are thinking of themselves as being a member of something bigger. They are taking into account the others' needs, and of course, they want to be involved in the process of deciding. And because this is, we know by pragmatism, the best way to satisfy their needs. So whichever the fields in the human activities, should it be economic, should it be in consumption, production, finance, and so on, should it be social, so should it be cultural, we know cooperatives could be active in any field. Though we have to understand that per se, there is no limitation for the fields of activities for cooperatives. Cooperatives are a tool for mankind to stay vivid and to improve their way of living. Of course, we know things needs change from places, from times, but cooperative principles are there to be an engine for us to go forward to build a better world. Though by starting there, we have to understand that the most important things for us as cooperative institutions is people first. So I believe that's going to be the main question I will tackle today. Where and how can we really make a real place, which is the first one and the most important one, to the people? So to start with, I will give two quotes. The first one will be for the most important person for us, Dame Pauline Green. And then a second person, which is very important on the world, but he is only second to Dame Pauline Green, the Pope. Because you might remember, for those of you who attend the last seminar, it was not there. It was at the press conference we were having with Mr. Banzai. Dame Pauline Green explained to journalists that ICA is almost the most important NGO in the world, just second to the Catholic Church. So this is why I thought it was good to start with quoting Pauline Green first. So what did Pauline Green told us on the 12th of February? She said, and she was talking about the cooperative movement, Japanese cooperative movement just after the Second World War. And she said, in these ways, Japanese cooperatives were an exemplar of what a cooperative should be: a voluntary and open organization, member-owned and controlled, autonomous and independent, giving an economic return to members, growing the skills of local members, and developing local leadership, cooperating with other cooperatives, and caring for the community. That's what she said was what was, of course, the cooperative movement just after the Second World War, the way it rebirthed from the war. And at the end of this presentation, she said, we cooperatives, we put the people at the heart of our economic decision-making. You know, back she stressed the role and the place of the people. That is why those national economies that are at better balance and more diversified economy have come through the financial crisis and economic recession more comfortably than those dependent on only one form of business. So you see how much, as the chair of the international movement, Dame Pauline Green is stressing the role of the people. And it is interesting, then the second quote, and Dame Pauline Green quote him. She quoted the Pope, the nowadays Pope. And the Pope said, it is time that we put the human being back in the global economy. So you see those two worldwide leaders that are telling the most important things in the world is the human at the center of everything. And of course, that remembers of the idea that the law is made for man and not the man for law. Of course, I distorted the quotation. You might know that the right quotation was that the Shabbat is made for man and not the man for Shabbat. But it has to be translated nowadays. It is in the Bible. It has to be translated by the law. So it means for us, as institutions, we do agree and we have to accept that the rules might change as far as what is the heart of everything, the man is right in the middle. So to be just a short history first about this idea, the role, the central role of people in the cooperative movement. You all know that the cooperative movement started mostly in Europe at the mid of the 19th century. That was a time of a huge social and economical revolution, a change in these countries. Different types of co-ops did burst at that time. Consumer co-ops, the Rochdale pioneers, of course, are well known. The banking cooperatives, the Raiffeisen movement, for example, the worker co-ops in France and in other countries, agriculture co-ops. So it was an age of bursting of the cooperative movement. But even if they started from local communities, already at that time, they felt they needed something to differentiate, to be identified of what they were doing. And that was, of course, the idea of setting principles or ideals. Why do we do the way we do things? And that's something which is important. It is something that was already enshrined in their bylaws, and that was then moved to the international movement. You might know that this year is the 120th anniversary of the ICA, International Cooperative Alliance. And that from the beginning, the European people that gathered in London to create the ICA, they put the principles in the art of the process. And since that foundation, we at the ICA global level, we have been very much concerned about the principles, not only for giving wonderful mottos just to be put underneath, on the buildings and so on, but we want the principles to be interactive with life, real life. We want the principles to be understood, and we want to take reality back to what we can tell about the principles. It is important to acknowledge that during that historical time, we have had international institutions that have taken with them our ideas, our cooperative ideas. Of course, the first one of this is the ILO, International Labour Organization. It was founded just after the First World War. And you might not know, but I tell you, the first managing director of the ILO was a French guy, and this French guy was a tremendous cooperator. And of course, he brought with him inside the ILO the importance of the cooperative spirit, taking care of the workers, okay? And this is why, for historical reasons, there is so much emphasis in the ILO on the cooperative movement. And then, later on, this idea passed over or spread out to the United Nations. And it is something, of course, that we're very glad about, is that the United Nations General Assembly decided that 2012 would be the International Year for Cooperatives. And of course, the declaration made by the General Assembly is now part of the international framework that gives us, okay, ability to be more well-known and much more aware of what we have to do. And of course, that goes back to the question, what is the interrelation in between our local community bylaws, the national laws, and the international framework? It has to discuss at every level. That's what exactly we're doing now. And of course, I have to tell, but it will be addressed later on, the role of the global ICA to work on giving new ways to enact on these principles. The blueprint, the ICA blueprint that was published just at the end of the international year, just to foster a decade for the cooperatives, is something which is very important. Charles Gould, who is the CEO of the ICA, will address this question later on for sure. It's not only for the ICA, these guidelines, this blueprint was published. It's for each of us. Each of us, we can start or we can work on this. And it is important to see there the role, the emphasis put in these guidelines of the people, on the people, okay? And then now we're working on the guidelines that will be published for the next General Assembly in Turkey, in Antalya, the guidelines to make the principles vivid in nowadays. So I won't expand much on what will be in these guidelines. And I have to say, I'm very glad that there are two members of the Principles Committee who are coming from Japan, and they've been very, very involved and very useful to the process of setting guidelines. But there are three major points I want to stress today. First, of course, is the role of the people, of the men and women, through, first, freedom of membership. Freedom of membership is something essential. It's not a question here in Japan. In many countries, in some countries, it might be a question. But even on this question of freedom of membership, indirectly, it could be addressed through the question of demutualization, because if you're free to be member of a co-op, why should you be deprived from the freedom to be kept in a co-op? So it is important to understand that whenever you think of the process of demutualization, there is, of course, an economical question whose wealth is taken off. Okay, but it's not only that. It's a question of freedom. If I'm free to get in, I'm free to stay in a co-op. I shouldn't be forced to be converted into a limited company without my own will. Secondly is, of course, autonomy. I won't expand much on that, but it is important, of course, since all the people gathered in the co-ops, they decide by themselves. Of course, they have to pay respect to the local, national, or international rules, but they have to decide by themselves. The third question which is there, it's the involvement. Involvement of people is something which is the most important. Because involvement, that's what makes trust, and that's what makes the legitimacy of the co-op. The worst thing that could happen in a cooperative is a cooperative without cooperators. That is to say, just an institution without any real life. I mean, really real members being active in. I was telling yesterday, we were having 3 days ago in Paris, a conference of researchers, and they published a very good study on the strands, the economic strands, but the weakness, intellectual weakness of the French consumer co-ops in between the two wars. And the study, the title was the cooperatives without cooperatives. There were strong institutions, strong economic institutions, but in fact, they turned to be weak politically. They turned to be weak on the ideas, because no more the members were involved in the process. So I believe we have to remember the center of things are the people. Then the second thing which is important, of course, which is another principle, cooperative principle, education. No one is born as a cooperator. You have to be educated to be a cooperator. It is, of course, a question of rights and duties. You have rights, you have duties too. And one of the both rights and duties is education. That is to say, to understand what it means to be a cooperator. What does it mean to compel, not only compel, but truly be involved in the principles, in the cooperative principles, locally, nationally, internationally. And you will see when it will be published in the guidelines on education, it's also educating people outside of the cooperative for them to understand what is a co-op. A cooperative is not a secret institution. A cooperative is not a kind of subversive secret structure trying to change the world beyond the people's will. It is a democratic structure in which the people decide the way they want to change the world. So this is the second point. The third one is, of course, and that will be tackled by my colleagues further on, it's cooperation between cooperatives. You can't be the best cooperative of the world just by yourself. A good cooperative, not the best, a good cooperative is a cooperative which is ready to work with the others, at least to talk with the others, to know with the others, and as far as possible to work with them. It could be locally, it could be nationally, it could be internationally. And of course, the last principle, which was settled at the last time we rewrite the principles, is the involvement in the community. So you see what is the importance of the people involvement in this process. So that turns to conclusion. We all, Japan and all countries, we have entered a fast-moving world. That our society is changing fast. Even the words, the meaning of the words sometimes is dramatically changing. We discovered that when we work at the Principles Committee on the words that were used not only 120 years ago, but only 20 years ago. In 20 years, things have changed dramatically. I'm not sure, now we're sure, that the generation under 30 does understand the same thing of us when we even use the word cooperative. I can tell you examples where I heard a young guy, and he was asked a question. He was doing some wonderful job on the ground, and someone was telling him, oh, aren't you running a kind of a cooperative? And he said, excuse me, sir. The guy that was telling that, he was about 60. And he said, I don't understand your question because I don't know what is a cooperative. So we have to be careful, and that goes back to education. At the same time, we are rooted communities, in countries. It's not because we are the citizens of a single world that we have to diminish the importance, the differences in culture, in history, in legislative matters and so on. But we have to build up trust in the cooperative movement. It's springtime. It's starting blossoming on the territories here in Japan. But sometimes we know when it is early springtime, there is sometimes some winter winds that can still come in and that will chill everything. I believe this is exactly what the Japanese movement, cooperative movement, is facing. The winter times are still there. I mean, for exactly our colleagues from the agriculture cooperative movement. But on the other side, I hope and I do expect that this winter time will be overpassed by better time for the springtime. And this today's seminar for me is, of course, a type of cherry blossom time. So I believe we have to find ways to resist against the winter the winter wind blowing. You know, there are two different ways to resist: the tall tree and the reed. You all know the reed do bend and resist, and the tall tree is harder for him to resist. But both of them, what do they have? The most important things: the roots. The roots, even for the tall tree, even if he's broken, maybe he could start back from the roots. So I believe we have to keep in mind our roots are the people. And the people that's the most precious treasury we have. So that's really what I want our Japanese colleague to understand. Why did we, last time and this time, why did we come to support you? Because we are both, on every country, well, now the citizens of of a single world, the small planet we're all living in, we have to be very conscious of this, the weakness of this single planet. So we came here as a part of the solidarity principle, which is the base of a cooperative movement, of course, and because we know it's not us bringing you only experiment, but we know that in some places, in some times, we need your help. We need Japanese ideas. We need Japanese involvement. This is our time for the legitimacy to the cooperative movement, locally, nationally, and internationally. So thank you so much for giving me, once again, the opportunity to meet with you, Japanese colleagues. Each time I go further, I do feel you are very important for the cooperative international movement. So thank you again, and it will be a pleasure later on to exchange with you with the questions. Thank you.